Hello, viewers. Today, I'm going to talk about the issue of spin-offs and the effect that they have upon Final Fantasy lore. Now, this is going to be a subject that many of the newer fans, I believe, who have only known Square Enix and have not really, they did not grow up in the 90s, they did not know about Squaresoft, and they had started playing Final Fantasy games when they were Square Enix. And peradventure, they are used to playing Dissidia games and the other spin-off titles. And they are not familiar with the idea of a Final Fantasy. In other words, the idea that Final Fantasy used to be based on the idea that you just got one, and basically they did not expand upon character lore. Now, many of you might already know I'm doing a series on this channel, somewhat retrospective in nature, in which I basically go through Final Fantasy VIII, look at dialogue, look at different things, and sort of share my opinions about all manner of things, but it's especially my belief that Ruinous is Artemisia in the original Squaresoft lore. Not Square Enix lore, but my belief that she is written in the fashion that really indicates that she is indeed Artemisia. And basically, I've been doing videos to sort of substantiate that, and I talk about this in every video for everyone who wants to know. Yoshinori Katase has retracted his original statement having to do with Rinoa not being Artemisia. He says that he does not know because he had several people writing with him, and therefore he cannot say if Artemisia is Rinoa or not. So apparently, according to him, even he does not know. I do not believe that, honestly, and I think that for the most part, that is a company way of sort of pacifying many of the people who really believe that Rinoa is Artemisia. I think they know the truth, whether she is or is not. I think for any one of those people to say, oh, we do not know if she is Artemisia, I think Hironobu Sakaguchi knows. I think everyone that worked on the original Final Fantasy VIII knows if Rinoa is Artemisia. That's just my opinion. I know that Yoshinori said, oh, I cannot possibly know because we had 2 or 3 writers, and I cannot say they all had their own ideas. But anyhow, despite what anyone may think in regard to that, what I'm going to talk about now have to do with the spin-off titles. So basically, if you did not know, it was not too long ago that Dissidia Opera Omnia was canceled. It was basically not canceled, but in other words, the game was shut down. As far as I remember, it was sort of a mobile title. But anyhow, what they would do was they would expand upon a lot of the character lore. But anyhow, there was one fan spent 3 years saving a Final Fantasy game before it shut down. 2 terabytes of space, over 100 hours of cutscenes to preserve Dissidia Final Fantasy Opera Omnia. A game that they shut down anyhow. And this is one of the problems about service-type games. They want you to pay into a service, and this is what they have done. Look at all these characters. Do you see all these characters? They are all expendable. They are not worth as much as they were, Cloud Strife, Vincent Valentine, Squall Leonhardt, Artemisia. None of these characters are worth anything. They do not have their own distinct sort of set lore now. You have to recognize that this is not like it used to be during the Squaresoft days, where we used to have characters, they had to define personalities, and they had to define stories, and you didn't just go and change them. If something was the way it was in the original story, let me put it this way. What they are doing in Final Fantasy now with these spin-off titles, they are actually worse than sequels. Because what they are doing is changing the lore. Now, this is very true in regard to Artemisia. But first we're going to read a little about this particular spin-off. February 29th was the last day of service for Dissidia Final Fantasy Opera Omnia, a mobile game based on Square Enix's Final Fantasy fighting series. Basically, it went on a long time. They had about 170 characters, 30 years of Final Fantasy history that they trashed, that they ruined. They just used all of these Final Fantasy characters from unique Final Fantasy games. The idea that Hironobu Sakaguchi had when he first made Final Fantasy was that each Final Fantasy was final. You didn't just bring out a character, and just completely change their storyline, which in some cases is what they have done with personality. When, you had a cameo appearance of Final Fantasy VII characters in Final Fantasy Tactics, it was sort of an interesting thing. But it was not really that significant. Now, in these spin-off titles, they sort of bring all of the characters that you knew back, and they sort of transform the narrative in ways that make it so that it does not end. You do not get a Final Fantasy. Characters that you had already thought about and already had your own ideas about, all of a sudden, they change. This is what Square Enix does. For those of us who you may call Squaresoft purists, in regard to games like Final Fantasy 7, 8, and 9, we see it from the perspective of Hironobu Sakaguchi, in that we sort of keep our minds in that space to where we say none of the other stuff is going to apply. A person like me, when I play Final Fantasy 7, I am not thinking about Crisis Core. I'm thinking about the game that I played when I was a young kid. I am not thinking about Final Fantasy 7 Remake. And what these games have done was actually it's been sort of disrespectful to us who grew up with the original games and played the original titles and knew what Final Fantasy was about. Hironobu Sakaguchi had a very good idea. But anyhow, let me continue. So, it's basically multiple chapters and side stories representing hundreds of hours of a game that can no longer be played. And he saved all of this. So it's gone, but he saved it. Now, excuse me, and they say, "Thank you all for your support over the years. May the light forever shine upon us." Yeah, the light of the money that you get from making these spin-off titles and not doing any type of original work. It's shut down for a good reason. Square Enix is losing money, and it should lose money in my opinion. People like me, I no longer care. I had my fun with Squaresoft. Square Enix has been basically a dumpster fire ever since they started, making these so many spin-off titles. And although I do like Dissidia NT, Dissidia in itself was sort of the beginning of the end, where eventually, at some point, you could recognize they were going to take these characters and just sort of mix them with each other, and to some extent, really, add on and sort of develop their stories. And that is not necessarily good, because if the writer is not good, and if the writer that you have is told, hey, you know what, and the writers may be good, but the company may say, hey, we need Artemisia in the story. How about you put, an old character like Cloud of Darkness in the story and give her a new narrative? And so, what Final Fantasy is now, and you may not consider it canon, but for the most part, in regard to Square Enix canon, it is canon. It is canon in regard to Square Enix canon. To a great extent. When you really think about how things have basically developed over time, how you have writers like Nojima on Twitter, he's saying, hey, do not even contact me about the writing, because he knows that they want to use these characters over and over again. He cannot say anything definite about the writing anymore, because just like that, on the drop of a dime, or just, even if they want to take out a character from the older Final Fantasy game, Final Fantasy 6, 7, 8, 9, whatever, and they want to do a Final Fantasy 9 remake or a Final Fantasy 8 remake and change every single aspect of it, or most of it, they can. And they are remaking these old games to their own preferences. They do not care about the original vision that Hironobu Sakaguchi had and what he made. You can tell. They have remade games like Final Fantasy VIII, but did you notice they start censoring stuff that did not even need to be censored? Okay, they start censoring, dumb things like the armband on General Caraway. Okay, I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. But, when I think about how these games are being developed now, how many spin-off titles and what the spin-off titles actually add to the story, we are getting something worse than what we got in original games. Okay? The characters being developed as they are, they think this is something, that they can make money from, and they do not care about how much they add to the character. But at some point, you have to create something new if you want it to be fresh. What they are doing is actually ruining characters by adding more and more content for them. And that's what Final Fantasy Opera Omnia was. It was just adding more and more content to these characters who you could have just said, hey, we can stop adding content for them. Let's make some new characters. And this is a problem. They keep beating dead horses over there at Square Enix. It really is a shame. So he worked on the goal of recording a lot of this stuff, uploading them to YouTube, the videos of everything having to do with Opera Omnia. So he's a video game enthusiast. He really liked the game. So he replayed through the entirety of Opera Omnia, recording everything the game had to offer. He was recording raw footage, battle scenes, character weapons, all types of things. So he wanted to ensure that they matched the story and weren't just full of random party characters. And so he did a lot here. He did a lot. All of this Dissidia stuff, because to tell you the truth, I did not play Dissidia Opera Omnia. It was a mobile game. I often do not play mobile games. 2 terabytes. So apparently, he arrived late to the Final Fantasy series. He was one of these new Final Fantasy gamers who, this really interested him, and I guess it gave him a sense of what Final Fantasy was, which is a shame you had to start out this way, and not really get to experience the original Final Fantasy as Hironobu Sakaguchi originally made it. And you got the experience of Square Enix, which is basically them just taking all of these characters from these old games and ruining the writing. And just basically, ruining the characters. Characters that were already complete in a narrative standpoint. And now they are just sort of retconning different details. All of a sudden, in Opera Omnia, Artemisia has some type of defined childhood that they can talk about, and the truth is, no, they didn't tell us anything about Artemisia's childhood in Final Fantasy VIII. They told us nothing. It was a big mystery. But anyhow, I'm going to be talking about that soon. So basically, they're talking about how ambitious the story is, which, yeah, it's ambitious if you consider them reusing ideas and sort of, making, adding on to ideas that are years and years old from the 90s. If you consider that to be unique and ambitious, it really is not, in my opinion. I just think it's lazy. So he spoke about how the game connected characters across the series, like Final Fantasy crossover fan fiction, pairing up Quina, the frog-eating chef from... I mean, basically they mixed and matched all of these characters. They expanded upon their stories. But, you know, they didn't preserve any of the cutscenes that happened about. They didn't preserve anything. They shut that down. Recognize that Square Enix is not our old Squaresoft. Listen. Some of you will root for Square Enix until, you know, some of you people are absolutely, you know, some people will defend Square Enix forever, but it is different. And some of you, peradventure, you grew up in the 90s. Maybe you're a 90s baby, but you don't realize, no, Square Enix is a different beast. They do not care. They do not care about preserving things. If they cared about preserving things, why would they take characters who were already complete and change them? Think about that. How much respect do they have for these old characters that they bring out over and over again? Cloud Strife Advent Children, Vincent Valentine, Dirge of Cerberus, Crisis Core, Crisis Core Remastered, Before the Crisis. Do you understand? Final Fantasy VII was the most popular, and they cannot come up with any new ideas. And I suppose, let me say this, it is not necessarily just them, because I saw what happened when they tried something different with Luminous Studios and Forspoken. And I remember there was something called, what was it, Project Agnes or something? And people were not so very offended when you had Project Agnes or whatever that thing was called, with the woman with the red hair. And it turned out that a lot of that happened to be something having to do with, you know, something similar to Forspoken, where you had a witch character and so forth. You had a witch character like this, and it turned out that instead of giving people this, they came up with a very interesting character called Frey Holland. Okay. And they gave us Forspoken. And it looked, the graphics are excellent, the voice actress was excellent. It was a very dialogue heavy game. It was an adventure type game. It wasn't necessarily an RPG. But you see, Project Athia started to be called Forspoken. This was a new thing that Square Enix was doing. And I would say, personally, I liked it. Because it was something new. It was something I could respect because they were not reusing the same characters. They finally did something new. Now, in my opinion, if the character was not a black woman, I think that plenty of people would have probably sung its praises and said, wow, the criticism in all likelihood would have been far less. They start saying, oh, Faye Holland talks too much. Oh, why is Faye Holland, why does she have so much swag? Why does she have so much style? Well, that's because it's a black woman playing it. We have something called soul. And for some reason, our soul, our swag, the way we carry ourselves, for some reason is very offensive to some people. And so, if you're like us, you'll notice that oftentimes when video games come out with black people as the main character or something like this, because this does not often happen. This is one of the only RPGs I know with a female main character who is a black woman. People came out in fervent opposition to this. And you have to realize, this was a new project. Instead of, saying, hey, Square Enix is doing something new, this is something we should support, even if we may not really like playing as a black girl or something, maybe we shouldn't go on the internet and just basically trash it. But people trashed it, and I myself personally, I have a feeling a lot of it had to do with racism. Because when you think about it, was Agni's philosophy Really given that much hate in regard to just a concept? No. No one was saying, oh, Agnes' philosophy looks really bad. What is this? No, it became Forspoken. People were very excited about this, and then the game comes out. It gives you a witch. It gives you a woman who's using all this powerful magic just like the trailer did. And a lot of people, they hated Forspoken. They hated the voice actress. They hated the character. They hated everything about it. And I just think, why? It was, although you could say something about basically things like how the game was paced, about some of the mechanics that maybe you would find in the game that's maybe an older RPG, but plenty of games reuse older RPG type concepts where, the game is not necessarily, especially JRPGs. So how is that anything new? Oh, there's some outdated concepts that they use, like, they have a scene where you use sneak mechanics. Well, there's only one, and most of the combat is high speed, high graphics, high magical combat, high fantasy fighting, which is what you want, I would imagine. You buy the game for that, and you get plenty of it. I mean, the game is full of fighting, the game is full of adventure. Personally, no one had a problem when they saw Agnes' philosophy. No one was talking about the character and how bad the character looked, or, no. Sure, you didn't hear her speak, but you knew it was coming, and plenty of people were very excited about it. And they came out with that. And it looked, it had the same style. It's witches, it's magic, you have a powerful female protagonist, but when it came out, and people saw this woman and said, oh, she's terrible, she curses. And I'm thinking, is this a joke? Most of the people playing, even talking about Forspoken are older people. You're not a kid. You've heard people curse before. People curse when they talk just in general. I mean, a lot of normal people that you talk to curse. They were saying, oh, she talks too much. I'm thinking it's an RPG type game. It's an adventure type game. All right? It's one of those types of games where you talk to people, so obviously the main character is going to talk. I heard these complaints and I just thought, wow, yeah, they have something against Faye Holland. I think it is pretty obvious what it is. But anyhow, that came out. And when that came out, it received a great deal of despise, hate, and vitriol for whatever reason. And so, can we be surprised that Square Enix goes to the trouble of making these games as reusing old characters, and they have their projects failing? They have their projects like Dissidia, Opera Omnia failing? Well, of course they're failing, because you're reusing the same characters to do the same types of spin-off games over and over and over again. When they did Final Fantasy XIII, that didn't receive good sales. And when they did Final Fantasy XIII Lightning Returns, they didn't get many sales. So Square Enix is in a bad spot. They are, in a sense, in a situation where their fans demand the Final Fantasy game. They want these characters, but you see, they're in a situation where the only thing people want is Final Fantasy. They want to see Sephiroth again. They want to see Cloud again. Oh, Artemisia looks hot in Dissidia. We want to see her again. So they keep making these spin-off titles. The problem is they have to shut them down because, honestly, you can only make the same game oh so many times before people get bored of it. And they're not willing to spend money on mobile games. And they say, hey, why can't you just make a new Final Fantasy? Because they want money. They need money. When Final Fantasy 15 was made, people didn't like it. When Final Fantasy 16 was made, most folks did not like Final Fantasy 16. People were saying Final Fantasy 15, you see, they were trying to do something new in Final Fantasy 15, but every time they tried to do something new, people say, oh, we don't want it. You see, the problem is that Square Enix is different than Squaresoft. They've been different than Squaresoft for a long time. And a lot of people For some reason, they do not realize that. They may have a lot of the same writers who are still working for them, who also were there during the Squaresoft days, but they are telling these writers to write differently. They are giving them different instructions. They are saying, hey, you need to put these old characters back in the games, and you need to write for this spin-off game, and put this in it, put that in it. Alright? The old way of Hironobu Sakaguchi of having a Final Fantasy is over. They call it Final Fantasy, but the fantasy is no longer final. You do not get a game that just ends. You do not get characters that, just have little minimal, are minimally affected by these spin-off titles. This isn't like Urkiage. This isn't like Final Fantasy Tactics where you see, Cloud Strife or, Eris the Flower Girl or something, and they're just minimal parts of the story. No, this isn't like, hey, they're just, they're not really expanding upon them. In these games, they are expanding upon them. Alright, and that is the problem. They do not care about these old characters and old storylines. And that is so obvious. But anyhow, the battle cutscenes, the connective tissue, these characters interacting with each other, these characters from different video games, these villains from different video games. Without them, he explains the discrete story of cutscenes can lose cohesion, and Square Enix didn't save any of that because they were using those old. They don't care about saving that. They do not care about saving that because they can bring out these characters from the dead anytime they want. They can bring up Sephiroth, Cloud, Artemisia, any of them. And they can just add new things and just say, hey, guess what? Sephiroth, he's teaming up with Seymour or, from Final Fantasy X or this or that. And they can just add on more and more and more story. They can say, most of you have seen what the Final Fantasy VII Remake became. You know what is in that. So you know that many of these people who are at Square Enix, they no longer care about the integrity of the series of Final Fantasy anymore. The difference between Squaresoft and Square Enix is that Hironobu Sakaguchi, he cared about Final Fantasy. He cared about it. Alright? At this point, even Final Fantasy Spirits is within. The movie is better than a lot of the spin-off nonsense that they create these days. And they were saying that was a failure because it didn't get good sales. But of course, they saw the sales that Advent Children got, and they said, hey, make spin-offs. Just keep using these old characters. Keep using them over and over and over again to get money. But, it has to be, if you want a company to succeed, you need some good quality. People will know when the quality of the product is not good. So you got Sephiroth teaming up with Artemisia, and it's a scene, and they have story behind it. Okay, they have all of these different connections between the characters. Dissidia and Spinoffs, sad to say, have ruined Final Fantasy. Square Enix has, because they sort of treat that, and they may be coy about it, but they sort of treat it as canon. This is why you have Yoshinori Kitase going out there and saying, oh, well, we don't, he had to sort of be coy about what he was saying as though he does not know. And personally, I would just be honest, I think he does know what the truth behind that theory of Renoa and Artemisia is. The company wants to use those characters. They're not going to tell you definite things about the story anymore. Nojima even said it. He is not going to tell you definite things about the story on Twitter because people are asking him too many questions. This is what he said. Nojima is done doing that. He stopped doing that in 2022. So, Dissidia Opera Omnia was still being, was still up at that time. You could still play it. Now it is shut down. It's 2 years later. It's shut down. They've shut down all the cutscenes, off the story content, and the only reason people can see it now is because people are saving it. Square Enix does not care about preserving that. They talk about how they care about the lore. Oh, we care about the lore. The lore of Final Fantasy. The lore of Square Enix. We care about the lore. They don't care about the lore. They don't care about the story. They act as though they're the RPG masters over there in Japan. And the truth is, they are not. The one who was masterful, making those Final Fantasy games was Hironobu Sakaguchi. He was a master at directing them. Okay, ever since he left, what they have been doing has been terrible for the most part. Okay, after Final Fantasy X, the whole series went downhill. It has. So, this guy, he's basically trying to preserve the stuff, doing game preservation. These shutdowns impact games of all sizes, from the biggest publishers in the industry. And you see, this is what happens when you have a game for service, when you have these mobile games. You can't really preserve them, but I do not really care if they do or not. Excuse me. So let me get to the point. What they did in Opera Omnia. Basically, in Opera Omnia, Artemisia reveals her background as a lonely child on the edge of the future, born as an evil sorceress. I thought you were supposed to have your powers handed down to you, and you weren't just sort of born as one. But they didn't say anything like that in the original Final Fantasy. Now, to prove this, in original Final Fantasy VIII, they said nothing of the sort. In regard to this, let's use that zoom in. In regard to Artemisia and this quote about childhood, she said only one sentence about childhood. She said, reflect on your childhood. That was it. This is the only mention she says of childhood. She says your sensations, your words, your emotions, but she does not tell you about what her childhood was like. She does not tell you that she was a lonely child and that she was born. No, you have no context because Artemisia hardly spoke in that game. She is an enemy without any backstory unless you take into account if you believe she is Rinoa, she has a backstory. If you do not believe she is Rinoa, she has no backstory. She is basically like Necron in Final Fantasy IX. You know nothing about her. You do not know about her childhood. So, what they did in Opera Omnia, because they want to make connections between the characters. We want a different experience. What they had to do, they had to add on to her character. This is why people like myself, when it comes to lore and lore conversations regarding Final Fantasy, I stick to canon in regard to, and Squaresoft canon. Now, Square Enix canon is completely different. I stick to the Squaresoft story. Outside of those 4 discs, I don't go beyond that. If a person is talking to me about Final Fantasy VII and they want to talk about, the reason Zack is this way is because I played Crisis Core. No, I do not care about the fact that you play Crisis Core. Hironobu Sakaguchi was directing the series. He directed the early games from Squaresoft. Square Enix and what they've been doing now has basically been adding upon the ideas and the concepts that Hironobu Sakaguchi, during his time there, had already created. Those people had already created Final Fantasy VIII and what it was, and there were no sequels to it. There were no spin-offs. There were no remasters where they were censoring everything in it. Okay, and hopefully there's not a remake, but Square Enix is going to do what Square Enix wants to do. Okay, if Square Enix wants to make a remake, nobody's going to stop them from making a remake and ruining the whole of that story. They've already ruined a lot of it. And let me just say this. This is why, in regard to Final Fantasy, the only Final Fantasy games I'm interested in, for the most part, from a story perspective, are the original, games up to 1 through 9. In 10, I like 10 too, but you see, that's about it. Okay, I think regarding 10 too, I think Final Fantasy X and X-2 were actually, in a way, you know, I even prefer Final Fantasy 13, 13-2, and 13 Lightning Returns in a sense because they're on the sequels. I do not like it when they do spin-offs and they just sort of, okay, this is not a sequel, but we're going to add personality to the character. And people are going to come to you and say, oh, well, in Final Fantasy Dissidia, Opera Omnia, it says that Artemisia had, this is her childhood, she was a lonely child, and she was, you know, so forth, born a sorceress. No, they didn't say that in the original Final Fantasy VIII, and this is one of the problems. This young man, he got into Final Fantasy late, and so for him, you know, what he knows about these characters is based upon what he experienced in Dissidia Opera Omnia. Okay. I mean, and you see, because, you know, everybody likes Sephiroth, everybody likes Artemisia and Cloud Strife and all of these different characters, and they want to see, oh, you know, they have all this fan fiction, you know, that they want it to be implemented in a way that sort of, that fan fiction community, which, to be honest, it's not really the fan fictions. It is the company itself sort of trying to cash in, trying to get money off nostalgia rather than making a good new product. Now, I know a lot of people are going to disagree with this, but, you know, to be honest, this idea of Project Athia, Forspoken, it was a new project. This was something fresh and new and interesting. I liked it more than Final Fantasy 15. I thought Final Fantasy 15 was terrible. I thought Final Fantasy 16 was terrible. But as far as Forspoken, it was it was a heavy action game. It was a heavy action game. I didn't really like Final Fantasy 15. I thought it was pretty, you know, personally, I had problems with it. But with Forspoken, that was very interesting. You know, that was new. I'm just playing as one character. That reminded me of the days when I was playing Final Fantasy Lightning Returns. It was fresh and interesting to play as one character. But when Square Enix did something new, and they took a risk, how were they rewarded? We want more Final Fantasy. Oh, who cares about Forspoken? Just make a new Final Fantasy game. Final Fantasy 16 comes out. People don't like it. Wow. Oh, this is like Game of Thrones. I'm thinking, whoa. I mean, come on. I mean, this is why Square Enix is doomed to fail, not only because of how they make games, how they reuse these old, you know, games that Hironobu Sakaguchi directed over and over and over again. It is also because of the fans. This is why they're losing money. You have a toxic fan base who just want to see, you know, all of the old characters, Cloud Strife, Tifa, Aeris, you know, they want to see them. They want to see Squall. They want to see their favorite villains like Sephiroth. And, you know, a lot of those people are not, they're younger and they don't care. And so companies are going to do what they can to make money. So can I really blame Square Enix? No, I cannot really blame Square Enix because Square Enix is doing what they have to do, they think, to make money. They're failing. They're failing a good deal because, you know, if you really want to have a product that people can respect, you will make new products. You will not keep using the same ideas over and over and over again. Oh, we got a new Dissidia. We got a new Final Fantasy spinoff. This is, you know, they've made music games from Final Fantasy. They've made, you know, all types of mobile games with Final Fantasy characters. It really is, let me tell you, I mean, they're not making anything new. And the things that they make that are new, people just say, no, we don't like this, just make more Final Fantasy. Just make a good Final Fantasy game. Make a new and unique Final Fantasy game. And they make new and unique Final Fantasy games that people don't want it. They don't like it. So, listen. I no longer even even deal with Square Enix that much. Other than, Dissidia NT, this is probably my only Square Enix game that I play now, these days. Other than that, if I play a Final Fantasy game, I like playing the old ones. So I just have to say the spin-offs have been terrible. They really have ruined the lore, the canon. A lot of people talk about how Bethesda has their lore ruined. Well, in a sense, if these people are going to count Dissidia Opera Omnia lore as canon, as something that really is something true, if you're going to count Ever Crisis, not necessarily, I suppose it's called Before the Crisis and Crisis Core, if you're going to count that as basically canon to the Final Fantasy VII story, which many people do, then what you have is basically a whole lore that is not connected to the original game, that does not really adhere to the spirit that Hironobu Sakaguchi had set out to make the games with, which is that this is going to be a final fantasy. In other words, he said every game is going to be different. This is not a matter of you taking a character and just changing them, which is what they did for Dissidia Opera Omnia. And I'm sure they did it to more characters other than, than Artemisia. So if it is not in the original story, what they have shown they are willing to do is just change the story. Oh, well, we know Artemisia does not have a childhood, her childhood explained in Final Fantasy VIII. We'll just make some details up. We'll just make one. So you see, this is the problem. What you do is you disrespect the original product. And that is what they are doing. That is what Square Enix is doing with a lot of these products. So, I mean, I really have no problem with a fighting game that just has the characters in them and they don't really add, anything substantial to the character. You just have a game like Urkiage or Dissidia NT, and it's just you have all the characters, but they're just fighting each other. And it's not serious. And you don't have to really question your understanding of the original game because they added something new. Alright? I think if they wanted to change a whole character story, what they should have done was basically create a sequel. Create their respective sequels, but they want to do more than that. They want to get these characters from the different games to interact, and Final Fantasy was never that way. It never was during the Squaresoft days. You only had a few cameo appearances of, specific Final Fantasy characters, but it was not what it is now. Okay? So, this is why Square Enix is failing. They're failing because of their decisions to basically, not be original. They're listening to these fans who are obsessed with these particular characters. They're not having the respect for the original product. And I do not, at this point, even think that the fans are asking for things like Dissidia Opera Omnia on a big scale. I mean, you may have some people who like the mobile games, but most people, they do not like the mobile games. They do not like things like that. They're not playing the sort of music game. I think they call it the rhythm game, one of those Final Fantasy rhythm games. Most people are not doing that. All right? At least not here in the United States, which is a very big market for them. But, over there in Japan, you may have a lot of people who have been playing Final Fantasy for so long, they play everything that's Final Fantasy. If it has Final Fantasy on it, they'll buy it. If it's Final Fantasy merchandise, they'll buy it. If it's a little drink that's called Final Fantasy Potion, they'll buy it. They'll buy all of the merchandise, all of the paraphernalia. They'll buy everything. Those are the extreme fans. Those are the fanatics. They don't care if it's spin-offs, titles, if they change the storyline of Zack Fair or Cloud Strife or anything like that. When you think about what the original games were and how mature those stories were, they were quite good. You didn't need to change those things. None of these people needed to do that, but they did. And it really is terrible, in my opinion. So, I just want to talk about this subject. This is what is currently ruining Square Enix. It really is ruining the Final Fantasy franchise, the Final Fantasy series. It's it is kind of, not what it used to be. I really do not think it is going to get better. And so this is why, Square Enix is now in the business of making remaster after remaster. They want to make more remakes. They have tried to complete that Final Fantasy VII remake. The last installment of the episodic Final Fantasy remake called Final Fantasy VII Rebirth received bad sales. It did not receive expected sales. And that is very disappointing for Square Enix because they want some money. They want more profits. They want to give their investors some more security. They want to give their investors some more confidence. And considering how things are going, when you have to shut whole projects down like Dissidia, Opera Omnia, when you have things like that where you wanted to make money with this, and what ends up happening is that you have to shut it down. All of that content that you had is gone. All of that content, you're preserving none of it. You have no offline version for people to play, and it was only online, and so now you do not have it. All of the changes you made to the story are gone now. That's because they did not care in the first place. To them, these characters, they do not mean anything to them. They can just change them when they want. If it doesn't work out, they just scrap the game, shut the game down, say, hey, we provided you a service. Let's just shut the game down. You no longer have it. Because to them, it is nothing for them to just make changes to the storylines of characters and just scrap the project. And I'm thinking, you changed the whole canon of a character. You gave them extra details in their backstory that they did not have. Okay? So they've done this. And they have been doing this. So, personally, as I said in my last video, I'm glad that Dissidia Opera Omnia has shut down. This is what is ruining Square Enix as a company. It is. And the truth is, the sad thing is, if Square Enix does make new products, a lot of people would just complain anyway. Because every new product that they are making, whether it be Forspoken or Final Fantasy 16 or even Final Fantasy 15, people generally do not want it. They keep saying, hey, make Final Fantasy 7 remake, or do this, or make Final Fantasy 9 remake. They want remakes. They want the old games. So this is one reason why Square Enix is in the situation it is in. And it is sad, but maybe, personally, I think the spin-off, titles have not been good for the series overall. I think that they should have just kept Final Fantasy as its own separate thing, made installments, not so many spin-offs, made new titles, and sort of gained the fan base of people who wanted to see the unique RPGs that they made, which they still make a lot of unique RPGs, but for the most part, when most people talk about Square Enix, they think about Final Fantasy. They think about Squaresoft. They want those new Final Fantasy games, and they think about those old characters that they have a nostalgia about, and they want them. And so, since they know Square Enix is willing to do remakes and not really adhere to the standard of Hironobu Sakaguchi, where he just said every game is going to be different, they know that if they say, hey, give us a Final Fantasy IX remake, and, they'll do it. But Square Enix is not going to remake it the same way because they want to bring in new fans. It's not going to make it just for the old fans. They're saying, hey, we want to remake, Final Fantasy VII for the new fans too. And so they're changing things in it. They want to appeal not only to the people who played it a long time ago, and that is one of the big problems. They're in a situation where they literally cannot win. They cannot win in any way. I mean, they're just in that terrible situation. But anyhow, viewers, I just wanted to talk about this, and I am planning to do more work on Final Fantasy VIII. I've been doing more reading of the script, learning about different things, and I am going to show you the version of Final Fantasy VIII that I play that does not censor, the boss enemy on the train, as well as it does not censor the blood in Artemisia's castle, because the United States version has green blood. The Japanese version had red blood. So some people have an online version that you can play. It is just like a regular PlayStation 1 ISO file that you can play from an emulator. Very interesting. So viewers, I would like to say that this was quite a rant that I did. Maybe a little exhausting to listen to. I have no idea how this will turn out. I would like to say, may you be blessed and farewell.